Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the ScrumMaster Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Wednesday Leading Change episode this week with Yousef Fahoum. Hi, Yousef. Welcome back.
Hey, thank you.
Wednesdays are all about change. And of course, we want to talk about change because it's one of the most recurring aspects of the Scrum Master work, right? Like it could be an individual, could be the team, could be the organization. We're very often involved with these change processes as they go through the organization and the team. So tell us one of those stories, a change process you were involved with, but then walk us through the story and highlight, the tips, the tricks, the techniques, the tools you learned back then that you still apply today.
I think the biggest change process is both in ourselves as Scrum Masters, but as we walk into a location. For myself, being involved in a couple of transformations, there can be a lot of wheels at work. I walked into one where there was a lot of wheels at work. It's a big transformation. It's a big organization. There's a lot of, smaller cultures. And so you have to diagnose where you're at and then eventually look at what was the interplay between your team or teams and the rest of the transformation if you're on one of those. So in doing that, in this one, there's things to diagnose, like the tendency for us to use story points as only as a measure of time rather than some complexity of the work and volume, et cetera. There was some always issues with using too much email, let's say, or something like that, and just kind of driving things away. So how do we do this? So walk in and learning and thinking about how Scrum Masters were oftentimes involved. We're seeing things as from our own perception and then trying to make a change happen to the ideal, but we're doing that from our own perception of what that ideal might be. And we're still growing.
And by the way, exactly, it's impossible to see what's going on without our perception because we are who we are. Like we can't escape our own confines, right?
Yeah.
Being aware of that is extremely difficult, although it's always happening, because sometimes we just we take so much for granted because of our experience, where we've been, what we went through, that we forget that other people may think that something that is obvious for us is completely alien for them, right?
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing for me. For telling this story is you have to be really humble about it, and it kind of sounds a little zenny or something you'd see on a Jedi council. We are one with the universe, and you're only seeing it from your own perspective, and it's so true. So how do we get there? How do as Scrum Masters was I able to get there? Perhaps I'm still trying to figure out how I gotten there yet, and how do we help people change or organizations change along with that? Now I tell people, I think of myself as just go back to my background in science. Agile is an empirical process, is it not? So the metrics we use, make sure that they're objective. Whether you're assessing the team, with a metric, make sure the questions you're asking yourself or the team are objective questions and are metrics. So let's make a change. So we go into this big transformation, and there's a lot of the typical resistance to, changing how we do estimations and this kind of thing. And the argument is often, well, estimations don't work. I've literally had team members throw the Scrum poker cards down on the table, what's wrong? And so I asked this gentleman, what's wrong? He goes, this doesn't work. It's meaningless. And I told him, well, it is a gimmick, but it's a gimmick to help us all talk. And so I just kind of treated him like the 10-year-old boy he was, or I was at one time, and just kept going around the room. Well, all of a sudden, we came to a story that he thought was really important, and he had his cards in his hand and was using them. And so you have to just be really honest. That was one tool I used. We all use Scrum poker cards or something like it. And I just be honest. I tell people it's a gimmick, complete gimmick. It uses a real tool. The Fibonacci sequence is incredibly widespread in science, but the Scrum poker itself is just a gimmick. It's to help us learn and talk to each other and find out what we don't know. We find out we say we're finding out what somebody else knows, but in the talking of it, I realize that I have not spoken about everything that I know or was thinking in the process. So that's a huge tool. Now I think we overrate that process as Scrum Masters. We really have to dive into that and just be honest. Tell people, I use Star Wars cards sometimes, just to make it fun. The other thing is, don't allow teams or organizations to just hide in something like a messaging tool, something like Slack, Twitter. I don't know if I can mention those things, but those are great tools, But I've had a team in this in this same transformation. It was this team that was wanted to use the messaging tool for their daily scrum, their daily stand up. And at first I said, the old me would have said, oh no, you have to be in person every day. But I'm trying to learn. And so for couple sprints, I said, okay, go right ahead. And then I kept metrics on what was happening actually in delivery and what they were talking about in the messaging tool. And we had a little retrospective. And I said, let's look at these metrics. So here I am trying to be the scientist. I'm going to facilitate an objective meeting because I already know that there's some emotional folks on the team. And what they saw was what we talk about in the messaging tool seemed like really great. We can list the things we did and how we did them. And then we look at the delivery of the metrics and they didn't match up. There was on many teams, I can see that the items will stay in state. They'll stay in dev or in test for days at a time. And then all of a sudden, everything will get done. Now, that could be that they're just waiting to close the ticket until everything is done. But most often it's because they're holding onto those things. They're working on several things. But in the messaging tool, they're saying, oh, I went and I did all these things. I committed my changes. I updated my GitHub environment, blah, blah, blah. And those things were either not recorded in our metrics.
So they were kind of doing things, but they were not updating the state of the tickets for the rest of the team to know what was going on.
That and other work was going on behind the scenes. So when you go look at the metrics in GitHub or in the code repository, there was all this activity that didn't relate to our sprint goals.
To the stories in the sprint.
Right. So I said, this is really great because all the directors and managers were saying, well, they're doing great because look at all their messaging. Okay, well, let's look at the objective metrics and see what's actually going on. You really have to be a scientist as a Scrum Master and really go, okay, I need to be an investigator. What is going on with this team? They look great, but they don't look great. Let's put these two together.
And a lot of these dynamics happen even kind of subconsciously, right? Like we were talking about yesterday on the Tuesday episode about this team that had been overworked by managers interrupting them for years. And probably those metrics didn't show up in the sprint stand-up or the sprint board, but they would have shown up in the code repository as well. And I think that that is a great tip for Scrum Masters to always go deeper. There's always more information that we can look at. And if something doesn't match up, like, people say everything is great, but you get the feeling that something is not great, then where can I find information about this? What else might be going on that I don't know about is a good question to ask ourselves.
And the other thing that happened with this team was they were brilliant. I mean, they outsmarted me by miles. And we're talking IQs are probably well over to 190. And their predictability was all over the place. And so it wasn't just the stuff that I found in the code repository metrics or whatever. They were still reliant on using story points as to tell a story of time. And this is when you're doing transformations, oftentimes I'm sure Scrum Masters have seen this a lot, where it's very hard for us as humans. We think we do measure time really great, and we're terrible at it. I mean, let's just face it. And the Fibonacci sequence is so much older than just Agile. Literally, if you go back and look at it, it was first discovered in Sanskrit poetry. The verse numerical system and the tempo. The tempo is all Fibonacci. So anyway, so it goes on. So what I did is one time I took this team's stories. I said, okay, you guys are really great at this, right? Okay. With like 3 sprints worth of stories. And I plotted their estimation point on the x-axis and number of days it took to deliver on the y-axis. Well, guess what? Oh, story of 1, 3, 5 would take anywhere from 1 to 25 days to deliver. And I did, this is the beauty about metrics, Vasco. Is we can be our little Scrum Master scientists. We don't have to talk at that. At first, you just put it up on the board and let everybody look at it. And you can just hear the jaws drop. And then I don't have to ask the question necessarily. So how come this took 25 days? Because every single time, Vasco, somebody on the team just gets excited. Why is this taking 25 days? I thought we had it done. You don't have to become confrontational as Scrum Master to help change occur.
Yeah, you don't have to be confrontational. That's very powerful.
Yeah, we can show people the metrics and have a conversation that's compelling and meaningful with just that simple scatter plot diagram. I've had multiple conversations, not just that team, but teams after that.
Yeah, absolutely. Great story. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Leading change is one of the core skills we must acquire, but it is only one of the steps towards our success as Scrum Masters. Tomorrow, on Success Thursday, we will talk about how to define success for the Scrum Master role. We'll cover tips on how to measure your way to that position, and most importantly, how to develop that focus on continuous improvement that is as important for Scrum Masters as it is for teams. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.